Tekashi 6ix9ine has definitely given his fair share of thoughts about King Von's passing, from blaming it on Lil Durk to saying some very interesting things about King Von himself. Here is what 6ix9ine said happened to King Von. Now let's get straight into it. Now 6ix9ine, he's been dissing King Von and Lil Durk since the day that he sadly passed. Obviously, 6ix9ine's method of keeping relevant in the hip-hop world is starting rap beefs with rappers, but 6ix9ine, he made his own theory on how King Von passed. Now 6ix9ine called out Lil Durk for being the main person involved in King Von's passing, as Lil Durk and Pusheisty released one of the biggest songs of the year a few weeks after King Von's passing. 6ix9ine believes that the lyrics when Lil Durk says, and I quote, "He was dissing on my cousin, now he's in that wood, huh?" was actually directed to King Von for having issues with Lil Durk's cousin Newski in the past. Now Lil Durk, he's made it very clear in his music to never diss his cousin Newski. Allegedly, King Von used to have beefs with Lil Durk's cousin Newski here and there, and has even allegedly been seen on Instagram Live calling him out for it. Now 6ix9ine mentions how King Von passed on November 6th, while the song with Shiesty was released on January 2nd. Now obviously 6ix9ine could be just doing this to stay relevant in the hip hop world, but he's also been seen showing pictures of having King Von's face on a massive t-shirt, as well as making some very interesting captions about King Von's passing. Now with that being 6ix9ine's thoughts on his passing, here's the actual truth behind King Von's passing. Now the day, it starts in Atlanta. Atlanta is home of the best recording studios in the world. It's the best way to record with other rappers and get work done. King Von, he was actually out in Atlanta on November 6th celebrating the release of his new album, Welcome to O-Block, and this was with a few selected friends, family members, and business partners on that night. King Von then rented out an entire Airbnb for the night, as him and his boys were planning on hitting the studio late at night after celebrating, and they needed a place to crash. Now while at the album release party, it was said by King Von's manager, who was beside him the entire night, even when the incident happened with Quando Rondo, that King Von, he was just not acting like himself the entire night. King Von, he was acting very strange and not really talking as much as he usually does. Now this could have been due to the fact that King Von got word mid-party that Quando Rondo was actually at a different club nearby, and there was an entire beef going on with King Von, Quando Rondo, and NBA Youngboy, involving all of their ex-girlfriends, as well as just internet beef that was going back and forth between the three of them, all on Instagram Live. Now King Von, he's not one to internet beef, so at the end of the celebration party, King Von, he then heads into his SUV with a driver and one other person. Usually King Von rolls with 3 security as well as the boys from O-Block, but tonight it was a very different story. Now after the celebration party, the plan was to all just go back to the Airbnb, hang out a little before going to the studio. Halfway to the Airbnb, that's actually when King Von tells his driver to turn the car around and go to a lounge called Monaco. Now at this lounge, no other than Quando Rondo just so happened to be there. He was parked inside of the parking lot taking a nap inside of his McLaren. Now, to this day, it's still unconfirmed whether this was just a coincidence of them meeting up here, but I don't believe it was. When arriving to the lounge, King Von ended up sitting into his SUV for around 20 to 30 minutes. He was not speaking to anyone, which is very unlike him, and he was always just scrolling through his phone and texting people. After arriving to the lounge and sitting in the parking lot, that's actually when the rest of Von's security and the boys from O Block who were at the Airbnb got word that King Von was acting very strange in a club's parking lot, not talking to anyone. So they immediately hopped into their SUVs and vehicles and rushed straight over. Now that's when the craziest thing happened. All you see on the surveillance cameras are these massive SUVs pulling up into a parking lot like one of the world's biggest celebrities were there. Now one of King Von's boys actually then scout out Quando Rondo. They then sprint back to where King Von's at and tells King Von. That's when King Von is then seen hopping out of his SUV finally, walking into the middle of the street where a white SUV was parked, and that is where Quando Rondo just so happened to be standing beside. King Von and his crew then start swarming Quando Rondo right in the middle of the street until a massive brawl breaks out. King Von and Quando Rondo, they are then seen on surveillance footage just going at it in the middle of the street. No firearms being used by either of them until Quando Rondo's best friend Lil Tim hops out of that parked white SUV, pulls out a firearm, and starts using it to defend Rondo in the brawl with King Von. With the sound of Lil Tim's firearm being used on the street, that's actually when undercover cops that were parked in the area started creeping up onto the location. When getting to the start of the street, the undercover cops then start lighting up the area. It was described as a literal war zone going on in the middle of the street. Firearms were being used left, right, and center. Everyone is sprinting out of the way, ducking for cover. Nobody knew what was going on as it was nighttime and nobody could really see anything. And while this is still happening, Quando Rondo and King Von are still out in the middle of the street. This is until King Von's best friend Muop then runs over to the middle of the street with firearms being used everywhere, knocks Quando Rondo out of the way, grabs King Von, and finally helps Von get into the getaway vehicle. Now sadly, in the getaway vehicle, they didn't get to the hospital fast enough. King Von sadly passed in the process, but while inside of the vehicle, one of the members that was with King Von that night mentioned how King Von was actually the most calm there. King Von, while in critical condition, was telling all of his boys in the vehicle to relax and calm down. Everything will be alright. But then sadly, he ended up passing in the process. Now this was such an unfortunate event. This is one that definitely could have been avoided, but as said by King Von's manager, who was with King Von on that night and standing beside him, whenever King Von has an issue with someone, especially over the internet, he likes to deal with it in person and not just sit around and let things blow over. King Von has always been a man of his word and never backed down to anybody. Now I am ending the video here. I hope you enjoyed. I'm out. Peace.